Errico Malatesta. Between Peasants. Translated from Italian. Publications of New Times No. 5, 1897, 7th edition. Jacques. Hey, that's good. I've wanted to talk to you for a long time and I'm happy to meet you. Ah. Peter. What have I learned about you? When you were in the country, you were a brave son, the model of young people your age. Ah. If your father was still alive. Rock. Jacques, why are you talking to me like that? What have I done to deserve your reproaches? And why would my poor father be unhappy with me? Jacques. Don't be offended by my words, Pierre. I am old and I speak to you for your good. And then, I was such a friend with old André, your father, that seeing you take a bad path, it saddens me as if you were my own son, especially when I think of the hopes that your father had based on you and to the sacrifices he made to leave you with a spotless name. Rock. But what do you say, Jacques? Am I not by chance an honest worker? I have never hurt anyone, and even, excuse me if I say it, I have always done as much good as I could. Why should my father be ashamed of me? I do my best to educate myself and become better. I seek, with my companions, to remedy the ills that afflict us all. How then, my dear Jacques, have I deserved your reproaches? Jacques. Ah, here we are. Hey. Parbleu. I know well that you work and help your neighbor. You are a good boy, everyone says so in the country. But it is no less true that you have been in prison several times. They say that the gendarmes are watching you and that just by showing up in the square with you, we risk attracting inconvenience. Who knows if I'm not compromising myself at the moment? But I wish you well and I will talk to you anyway. Pierre, listen to the advice of an old man, believe me, let the gentlemen who have nothing to do talk politics, and you, think about working and acting well. In this way, you will live peacefully and happily, otherwise you will lose your soul and your body. Listen to me, leave bad company. It is they, we know, who distract the poor boys. Rock. Jacques, believe me, my companions are brave young people, the bread they eat costs them tears and is watered with their sweat. Let the bosses say bad things about it, who would like to suck every last drop of our blood from us and then treat us as scoundrels and trash if we seek to improve our lot, to escape their tyranny. My companions and I were in prison, it's true, but it was for a just cause. We will go again, and perhaps something worse will happen to us, but it will be for the good of all, and because we want to destroy injustices and poverty. And you who have worked all your life and suffered from hunger like us, you who will perhaps be forced to die in the hospital when you can no longer work, you should not get along with the gentlemen and the government to come across those who seek to improve the lot of poor people. Jacques. My dear child, I know that the world is going badly, but wanting to change it is like wanting to straighten the legs of a knocking dog. So let's take it as it is, and pray to God that at least we won't miss the soup. There have always been rich and poor, we who were born to work must work and be content with what God sends us, otherwise it is to the detriment of peace and honor. Rock. And what are you talking to me about honor? The gentlemen, after having taken everything away from us, after having forced us to work like animals to earn a piece of bread, while they live on our sweat without doing anything, in wealth and in debauchery, the gentlemen then come to say that we must, to be honest people, willingly bear our lot and see them grow fat at our expense. If, instead, we remember that we too are men, and that he who works has the right to eat, then we are bandits, the gendarmes drag us to prison and the priests, on top of that, send us to hell. Let me tell you, Jacques, to you who have never sucked the blood of your fellow man, the real bandits, the people without honor are those who live under oppression, those who have seized everything that is under the sun, and who, through persecution, have reduced the people to the state of a flock of sheep who quietly allow themselves to be sheared and slaughtered. And you would join these people to fall on us? It is therefore not enough that they have for themselves the government which, being made by the rich and for the rich, can only support them, must our own brothers, the workers, the poor, rush at us, because we want them to have bread and freedom? Ah, if poverty, forced ignorance, habits contracted during centuries of slavery did not explain this painful fact, I would say that it is they who are without honor and without dignity, these poor people who make themselves the henchmen of the oppressors of humanity, and not we who sacrifice this miserable piece of bread and this shred of freedom to try to achieve the state where all will be happy. Jacques. Yes, certainly, you say nice things, but without the fear of God, nothing good can be done. You won't make me believe it. I heard our holy man priest speak, and he said that you and your companions are a bunch of excommunicated people. I heard Mr. Antoine, who studied and always reads the newspapers, and he also claims that you are either madmen or bandits who would like to eat and drink without doing anything, and who, instead of realizing the good of workers, prevent the gentlemen from arranging things as best as possible. Rock. James, if we want to reason, let us leave God and the saints in peace, because, you see, the name of God serves as a pretext and justification for all those who want to deceive and oppress their fellow men. Kings claim that God has given them the right to rule, and when two kings fight over a country, they both claim to be God's messengers. God, however, agrees with the one who has the most soldiers and the best weapons. The owner, the exploiter, the hoarder, all speak of God. The Catholic priest, the Protestant, the Jew, the Muslim also call themselves representatives of God. It is in the name of God that they wage war against each other and each try to bring water to their mill. None of them care about the poor. To hear them say, God would have given them everything and condemned us to poverty and work. Theirs is paradise in this world and in the next, hell for us on this earth, and paradise only in the other world, if we have been very obedient slaves. Listen, Jacques, I don't want to get into matters of conscience and everyone is free to think as they want. As for me, I believe neither in God nor in all the stories of the priests, because, of all the religions of which the priests claim to be in possession of the truth, none can provide proof in favor of the dogmas which they affirms. I too could, if I wanted, invent a bunch of nonsense and say that anyone who does not believe me and does not obey me will be condemned to eternal punishment. You would call me an impostor, but if I took a child, if I always told him the same thing without anyone being able to tell him the opposite, obviously he would believe in me, just as you believe in your priest. But, in short, you are free to believe as you wish. However, do not come and tell me that it is God who wants you to work and suffer from hunger, that your sons become thin and sick for lack of bread and care, that your daughters are exposed to becoming the mistresses of your boss, because then I would say that your God is a murderer. If God exists, what he wants, he hasn't told anyone. Let us therefore think about making our own happiness and that of our fellow human beings in this world. If there were a God in the other world, and this God were just, he would not blame us for having fought to do good, instead of having caused suffering or allowing others to suffer. Men, who, according to what the priest said, are all creatures of God, and therefore our brothers. And then, believe me, today that you are poor, God condemns you to the most difficult work. If tomorrow you manage to earn a lot of money by any means, even by committing the most vile action, you will immediately acquire the right to no longer work, to ride a carriage, to mistreat peasants, to seduce the daughters of the poor, and God will let you do it, just like he lets your boss do it. Jacques. By my faith. Since you learned to read and write and started mixing with city dwellers, you have become such a good talker that you would confuse a lawyer. And, speaking frankly, you said things that made a certain impression on me. Imagine that my daughter, Rossini, is already grown up. She has found a good match, a brave young man who loves her, but, you understand, we are poor. It would be necessary to provide the bed, the trousseau, and a little money to open a shop for him, because the guy is a locksmith, and if he could leave the boss who makes him work for almost nothing and start his own business, he would have the means to raise the family he would create. But I have nothing, neither does he. The boss could advance me a little money which I would pay back little by little. Well, would you believe it? When I spoke to him about it, he replied with a sneer that it was a matter of charity and that it was his son's business. The young boss, in fact, came to find us. He saw Rossini, stroked her chin and told us that he had at his disposal a trousseau which had been made for another. Rossini just had to come and get it herself. And he had such a look in his eyes as he said this that I almost had a misfortune. Oh! If my Rossini! But let's leave that. I am old and I know that this world is infamous, but that is no reason for us two to become rascals. Finally, is it true, yes or no, that you want to take their property from those who own? Rock. All in good time. That's how I love you. When you want to know something of interest to the poor, don't ask the gentlemen. They will never tell you the truth, because no one likes to speak against themselves. And if you want to know what the socialists want, ask me or my companions and not your priest or Mr. Antoine. However, when the priest talks to you about these things, ask him why you, who work, only eat soup, while he, who stays all day without doing anything, eats good roast chickens with his nephews. So ask him again why he is always with the rich, and only comes to your house to get something, why he always agrees with the gentlemen and the gendarmes, and why, instead of taking the bread out of the poor people's mouths, under the pretext of praying for the souls of the dead, he does not start working to help a little the living and no longer be a burden to others. As for Mr. Antoine, who is young, robust, educated, and who spends his time playing at the cafe or chatting about politics, tell him that before talking about us, he stops leading a lazy life. And that he learns what work and misery are. Jacques. On this, you are absolutely right, but back to the question. Is it true, yes or no, that you want to steal the goods of those who own? Rock. That's not true, we don't want to steal anything at all, but we want the people to take the property of the rich and put it in common for the benefit of all. By doing this, the people will not steal the fortunes of others, but will simply gain their own. Jacques. How then? Is the gentleman's property by any chance ours? Pierre. Certainly, it is our property, it is everyone's property. Who then gave it to the gentleman? How did they win it? What right did they have to seize it, and what right do they have to keep it? Jacques. But it was their ancestors who left it to them. Rock. And who gave it to their ancestors? How? Here are stronger or happier men who have seized everything that exists, who have forced others to work for them, not content with living in idleness themselves, oppressing and starving the majority of their contemporaries, they left to their sons and grandsons the fortune they had usurped, thus condemning all future humanity to be the slave of their descendants, who, moreover, irritated by idleness and by the long practice of power, would be incapable today of doing what their fathers did. And that seems fair to you? Jacques. If they took the fortune by force, then no. But the gentlemen say that their wealth is the fruit of work, and it does not seem fair to me to take away from someone what he has acquired at the cost of his work. Rock. Always the same story. Those who do not work and who have never worked always speak in the name of work. But tell me, how were the earth, the metals, the coal, the stones, and the rest produced, and who produced them? Certainly, these things, whether God made them, or rather whether they are the spontaneous work of nature, we all find when we come into the world, so they should be useful to everyone. What would you say if the gentlemen wanted to seize the air to use it for themselves and give us only a little of it, and the most corrupt one, by making us pay for it with our work and our fatigue? Now, the only difference that there is between the earth and the air is that the earth, they found the means to seize it and to share it, while they were unable to do so. Make for air, but believe me, if it were possible, it would be like the air and the earth. Jacques. It's true, this seems fair to me, the earth and all the things that no one has done should belong to everyone. But there are things that did not happen on their own. Rock. Certainly there are things which are produced by the labor of man, and the land itself would be of little value if it were not cleared by the hand of man. But, in fairness, these things should belong to the one who produced them. By what miracle are they precisely in the hands of those who do nothing and who have never done anything? Jacques. But these gentlemen claim that their fathers worked and saved. Rock. And they should say on the contrary that their fathers made others work without paying them, precisely as we do today. History teaches us that the lot of the worker has always been miserable and that he who has worked without frustrating others has never been able to save money and has never even had enough to eat his fill. Look at the example before you, doesn't everything that workers produce go into the hands of the bosses who take it? Today, a man buys for a few francs a corner of uncultivated and marshy land, he puts men there to whom he barely gives enough not to die of hunger and, while they work, he remains quietly in the city doing nothing. After a few years this useless piece of land became a garden and was worth 100 times more than it was originally worth. The sons of the owner, who will inherit this fortune, will also say that they enjoy the fruit of their father's work, and the sons of those who really worked and suffered will continue to work and suffer. What do you think? Jacques. But, if really, as you say, the world has always been like this, there is nothing to be done, and the bosses can't do anything about it. Rock. Well, I want to admit everything that is favorable to the gentleman. Let us suppose that the owners are all the sons of people who have worked and saved, and the workers all the sons of men who are idle and spendthrift. What I say is obviously absurd, you understand, but even if things were really like this, would there be the slightest justice in the current social organization? If you work and I am a lazy person, it is fair that I be punished for my laziness, but that is no reason why my sons, who will perhaps be brave workers, should kill themselves with fatigue and die of hunger to keep your sons in idleness and abundance. Jacques. All this is very beautiful and I do not contradict it, but after all the gentlemen have fortune, and in the end, we must thank them, because, without them, we could not live. Rock. If they have fortune, it is because they took it by force and increased it by taking the fruit of the labor of others. But they can lose it the same way they acquired it. Until now, in this world, men have waged war against each other, they sought to take the bread out of each other's mouths and each of them considered himself lucky if he was able to subdue his fellow man and use him as a beast of burden. But it is time to put an end to this situation. By waging war we gain nothing, and man has only reaped from all this misery, slavery, crime, prostitution and, from time to time, those bloodlettings which are called wars and revolutions. If, on the contrary, they wanted to agree, love and help each other, we would no longer see these misfortunes, there would no longer be people who have a lot while others have nothing, and we would make sure that everyone is as well off as possible. I know well that the rich, who have become accustomed to commanding and living without working, do not want to hear about a change in the system. We will act accordingly. If they finally want to understand that there must no longer be hatred or inequality between men and that everyone must work, so much the better. If, on the contrary, they claim to continue to enjoy the fruits of their violence and the thefts committed by them or by their fathers, then, too bad for them, they took by force everything they own, also by force we will not take it from them. If the poor know how to get along, they will be the strongest. Jacques. But then, when there are no more gentlemen, how will we manage to live? Who will give work? Rock. What question? But you see every day how it happens, it is you who pick, sow, and mow, it is you who thresh the grain and carry it into the granary, it is you who make the wine, the oil, and cheese, and you ask me how we will live without the gentlemen? Ask me instead how the gentlemen would survive if we weren't there, we poor imbeciles, workers in the countryside and the city, who struggle to feed and clothe them and who let them take our daughters so they can have fun. A moment ago, you wanted to thank the bosses because they keep you alive. Don't you understand that they are the ones who live off your work and that every piece of bread they eat is taken away from your children? That every gift they give to their wives represents misery, hunger, cold, perhaps even prostitution for yours? What are the gentlemen producing? Nothing. So everything they consume is taken away from the workers. Suppose that tomorrow all the workers in the fields disappear, there will be no one left to work the land and everyone will die of hunger. Let the shoemakers disappear, and we will no longer make shoes. If the masons disappear, we will no longer be able to build houses, and so on. If each class of workers becomes lacking one after the other, with it a branch of production will disappear and man will have to deprive himself of useful or necessary objects. But what harm would we feel from the disappearance of the gentleman? It would be as if the locusts disappeared. Jacques. Yes, it is indeed we who produce everything, but how would I go about producing wheat if I have no land, no animals, no seed? Believe me, there is no other way, one must necessarily be dependent on the bosses. Rock. Let's see, Jacques, do we understand each other, yes or no? I seem to have already told you that we must take away from the masters what is used to work and live, the land, the tools, the seeds, everything. I know this well. As long as the land and the tools of work belong to the masters, the worker must always be a subject and will only reap slavery and misery. This is why, remember this, the first thing to do is to take away property from the bourgeois. Without it, the world will never improve. Jacques. You're right, you said it. But what do you expect? These are things so new to me that I get lost in them. Tell me a little about how you would like to do it. This property taken from the rich, what would we do with it? We'd share it, wouldn't we? Rock. Not at all, and when you hear that we want to share, that we want to take the place of those who have, know that whoever says that is ignorant or wicked. Jacques. But then? I do not understand anything. Rock. And yet it's not difficult, we want to put everything in common. We start from this principle that everyone must work and that everyone must be as good as possible. In this world, one cannot live without working. If a man did not work, he would have to live on the labor of others, which is unjust and harmful. But, of course, when I say that everyone must work, I mean everyone who can do it. The crippled, the impotent, the old must be supported by society, because it is a duty of humanity not to make anyone suffer. Besides, we will all become old, and we can become crippled or impotent at any moment, both we and those who are dear to us. Now, if you think carefully, you will see that all wealth, that is to say everything that exists that is useful to man, can be divided into two parts. One which includes the land, the machines, and all the instruments of work, the iron, the wood, the stones, the means of transport, etc., etc., is essential for working and must be put in common, to serve to everyone as a working tool. As for the way of working, that's something we'll see later. The best would be, I believe, to work together because, in this way, we produce more with less fatigue. Moreover, it is certain that joint work will be adopted everywhere, because, to work separately, we would have to renounce the help of machines which simplify and reduce human work. Moreover, when men no longer need to take bread from each other's mouths, they will no longer be like cats and dogs and will find pleasure in being together and doing things in common. We will, of course, let those who wish to do so work alone. The main thing is that no one can live without working, thus forcing others to work on their behalf, but this can no longer happen. Indeed, everyone having the right to the material of work, no one will certainly come and put themselves in the service of another. The other part of wealth includes things that directly serve human needs, such as food, clothing, houses. These must be pooled and distributed so that we can go until the next harvest and wait until the industry has provided new products. As for the things that will be produced after the revolution, when there will no longer be idle bosses living off the fatigue of hungry proletarians, they will be distributed according to the will of the workers of each country. If they want to work together, everything will be for the best. We will then seek to regulate production in such a way as to satisfy the needs of all and consumption in such a way as to ensure the greatest amount of well-being for all, and all will be said. If we do not do this, we will have to calculate what each person produces so that everyone can take the quantity of objects equivalent to their production. This is a rather difficult calculation, which I believe, for my part, almost impossible, which means that when we see the difficulty of proportional distribution, we will more easily accept the idea of putting everything in common. But, in any case, the basic necessities, such as bread, housing, water, and things of this kind, must be provided to everyone regardless of the amount of work that each person can provide. Whatever the organization adopted, inheritance must no longer exist, because it is not fair that one is born with wealth and the other with hunger and work. Even if we accept the idea that everyone is master of what they have produced and can make savings for their personal account, it will be necessary that upon their death, these savings return to the community. Children, however, must be raised and educated at everyone's expense, and in such a way as to provide them with the greatest possible development and education. Without this, there would be neither justice nor equality. We would violate the principle of everyone's right to work tools. It would not be enough to give men land and machines if we did not seek to put them in a position to use them as best as possible. About women, I tell you nothing, because, for us, women must be equal to men, and when we speak of men, we mean humanity without distinction of sex. Jacques. There is one thing, however: taking the fortune from the gentleman who stole and starved the poor people is good, but if a man, through hard work and thrift, has managed to put aside a few pennies, to buy a small field or to open a small shop, by what right can you take away from him what is truly the fruit of his work? Rock. You are telling me something very improbable. It is impossible to save money today when the capitalists and the government take most of the products, and you should know it, you who, after so many years of diligent work, are as poor as before. Besides, I have already told you that everyone has the right to raw materials and work tools. This is why if a man owns a small field, provided he works it with his hands, he will be able to keep it well, and he will also be given the improved tools, fertilizers, and everything that will be necessary so that he can make the land produce as much as possible. Certainly, it would be preferable to put everything in common, but for this there will be no need to force anyone, because the same interest will advise everyone to adopt the system of communism. With common property and work, everything will go much better than with isolated work, especially since with the invention of machines, isolated work becomes, relatively, ever more powerless. Jacques. Ah, machines. These are things we should burn. They are the ones who break their arms and take away work from poor people. Here, in our countryside, we can count on the fact that every time a machine arrives, our wages decrease, and that a certain number of us remain without work, forced to go elsewhere so as not to die of hunger. In the city, it must be worse. At least, if there were no machines, the gentlemen would need our work a lot and we would live a little better. Rock. You are right, Jacques, to believe that machines are one of the causes of poverty and lack of work, but this comes from the fact that they belong to the rich. If they belonged to the workers, it would be quite the opposite. They would be the main cause of the well-being of humanity. Indeed, machines actually only work for us and faster than us. Thanks to machines, man will no longer need to work long hours to satisfy his needs and will no longer be condemned to arduous work that exceeds his physical strength. This is why, if machines were applied to all branches of production and belonged to all, we could, in a few hours of light and pleasant work, satisfy all the needs of consumption, and each worker would have time to learn, to maintain friendly relations, to live in a word, and to enjoy life by taking advantage of all the achievements of civilization and science. So, remember, we must not destroy the machines, we must seize them. And then, know that the gentlemen would just as well defend their machines against those who would destroy them as against those who would try to seize them. Therefore, since it would be necessary to make the same effort and run the same dangers, it would be purely stupid to destroy them rather than take them. Would you want to destroy the wheat and the houses if there was a way to share them among everyone? Certainly not. Well, the same must be done with machines, because, if they are in the hands of the bosses the instruments of our misery and our servitude, they will become in our hands instruments of wealth and freedom. Jacques. But for everything to go well with this system, everyone would have to work with good will. Is not it? Rock. Certainly. Jacques. What if there are some who want to live without working? Fatigue is hard and doesn't even please dogs. Rock. You are confusing society as it is today with society as it will be after the revolution. Fatigue, you said, does not even please dogs, but could you go whole days without doing anything? Jacques. I don't, because I'm used to work, and when I have nothing to do, my hands seem to itch, but there are so many who would stay at the inn all day playing cards or walking around doing nothing. Rock. Today, but after the revolution, it will no longer be the same, and I will tell you why. Today, the work is difficult, poorly paid and despised. Today, anyone who works must die of fatigue, die of hunger and be treated like a beast of burden. He who works has no hope. He knows that he will have to end his life in the hospital if he does not end up in the galleys, unable to take care of his family. He enjoys nothing in life and continually suffers from mistreatment and humiliation of all kinds. He who does not work, on the contrary, enjoys all his comforts. He is prized, esteemed, all honors, all pleasures are for him. Even among workers, the one who works the least and does the least difficult things earns more and is more esteemed. Is it any wonder then that people work with disgust and eagerly seize the opportunity to do nothing? When, on the contrary, the work will be done in human conditions, for a reasonable time, and in accordance with hygiene laws, when the worker knows that he works for the well-being of his family and of all men, when work will be the essential condition for being valued in society, and the lazy person will be exposed to public contempt like the spy and the go-between today, who will then want to give up the joy of knowing that they are useful and loved, in order to live in an idleness as fatal to his body as to his mind? Even today, apart from a few rare exceptions, everyone feels an invincible repugnance, almost instinctive, for the profession of snitch or that of matchmaker. And yet, by doing these despicable jobs, we earn much more than digging the earth. We work little or nothing and we are more or less protected by authority. But as these are infamous professions, which mark a profound moral abjection, almost all men prefer poverty to this infamy. There are, it is true, exceptions. There are weak and corrupt men who prefer infamy, but it is because they were forced to choose between it and misery. On the contrary, who would choose an infamous and contemptible life if he could, by working, have well-being and public esteem? Certainly, if such an event were to occur, it would be so contrary to the nature of man that it would have to be considered as a case of madness of some kind. And have no doubt, public disapproval of laziness would not fail to occur, because work is the first need of a society. The lazy person would not only harm everyone by living on the product of others, without contributing through his work to the needs of the community, but he would break the harmony of the new society and would be part of a party of malcontents who might desire a return to the past. Communities are like individuals, they love and honor what is or what they believe to be useful, they hate and despise what they know or believe is harmful. They can be wrong and are even wrong too often, but in the case in question, error is not possible, because it is quite evident that he who does not work, eats and drinks at the expense of others and does harm to everyone. To prove this, suppose that you are associated with other men to do joint work from which you will share the product equally. Certainly then you will have consideration for those of your companions who are weak or unskillful, but as for the lazy person, you will make his life so hard that he will leave you or will soon want to work. This is what will happen in large society, while the laziness of a few can cause significant damage. And then, in the end, if we could not move forward, because of those who would not want to work, which I believe to be impossible, the remedy will be easy to find: they will, perhaps, be expelled from the community. So, having only the right to raw materials and working instruments, they will be forced to work if they want to live. Jacques. You're starting to convince me, but tell me, would all men be obliged to work the land? Rock. Why that? Man does not only need bread, wine, and meat, he also needs houses, clothes, books, in a word everything that workers of all trades produce, and no one can provide for all his needs alone. Already, to work the land, do we not need the blacksmith and the carpenter who make the tools, and consequently, the miner who digs up the iron and the mason who builds the houses, the stores, and so on? So, it is not said that all the workers will work the land, but that all will do useful works. The variety of professions will also allow everyone to choose the work that suits them best, and thus, at least as far as possible, work will no longer be for man more than an exercise, an entertainment. Ardently desired. Jacques. So everyone will be free to choose the profession they want? Rock. Certainly, taking care that the arms are not focused exclusively on certain professions and are not lacking in others, as we will work in the interest of all. We must ensure that everything that is necessary is produced, reconciling as much as possible the general interest and individual preferences. But you will see that everything will work out for the best, when there are no longer bosses who make us work for a piece of bread, without us being able to worry about knowing what and who our work is for. Jacques. You say that everything will work out, and I, on the contrary, believe that no one will want to do difficult jobs. Everyone will want to be lawyers or doctors. Who will plow the land? Who will want to risk their health and life in the mines? Who will want to enter black wells and touch dung? Rock. As for the lawyers, leave them aside, because, like the priests, they are a gangrene that the social revolution will make completely disappear. Let us talk about useful works and not those done at the expense of others, otherwise, the street murderer who often has to endure great suffering will also have to be counted as a worker. Today we prefer one profession to another, not because it more or less conforms to our faculties and our tastes, but because it is easier to learn, because we earn or hope to earn more, because that we think we find work more easily, and, only secondarily, because this or that work can be less painful than another. In short, the choice of a profession is imposed on us above all by our birth, chance, and social prejudices. For example, the profession of plowman is a profession that would not appeal to any city dweller, even among the most miserable. And yet there is nothing repugnant about agriculture in itself, and life in the fields does not lack pleasures. On the contrary, if you read the poets, you see them full of enthusiasm for rural life. But the truth is that the poets who write books have never plowed the land, while the farmers kill themselves with fatigue, die of hunger, live worse than the animals and are treated like worthless people, so much so that the last city wanderer is offended to hear himself called a peasant. How then do you expect people to willingly work the land? We ourselves, who were born in the countryside, leave it as soon as we can, because, whatever we do, we are better off elsewhere and more respected. But who among us would want to leave the fields if he worked for himself and found well-being, freedom and respect in working the land? It is the same for all professions, because the world is such that today the more necessary and difficult a job is, the more it is poorly paid, despised, and done in inhumane conditions. For example, go to a goldsmith's workshop and you will find that, compared to the filthy slums in which we live, the premises are clean, well ventilated, heated in winter, and that daily work is not very long, and that the workers, although poorly paid, because the bosses still take the best of their product, are nevertheless treated quite well compared to other workers. The evening, for them, is a celebration. When they take off their work jacket, they go wherever they want without fearing that people will stare at them and ridicule them. On the contrary, go to a mine, and you will see poor people who work underground, in pestilential air, and who consume their lives in a few years for a pittance, if, by chance, after having finished their work, they allow themselves to go where the gentlemen gather, very happy if they are only chased away by taunts. After all, why is it surprising that a man would rather be a goldsmith than a miner? I tell you nothing about those who use utensils other than the pen. Imagine this: a man who only writes bad newspaper articles earns 10 times more than a peasant and is esteemed much more than an honest worker. For example, journalists work in elegant rooms, shoemakers in sad shops, engineers, doctors, artists, teachers, when they have work and know their job well, live like lords. Masons, on the contrary, printers, workers of all kinds, and we can also add school teachers, die of hunger even while killing themselves with work. I do not mean by this, understand me carefully, that only manual work is useful, because study is on the contrary the only way to overcome nature, to civilize oneself and to acquire more freedom and well-being. B. Doctors, engineers, chemists, professors are as useful and necessary in modern society as peasants and other workers. I only mean that all useful work must be equally appreciated and done in such a way that the worker finds equal satisfaction in doing it. I also mean that intellectual works, which are in themselves a great pleasure, which give man great superiority over those who remain in ignorance, must be accessible to all and not remain the privilege of a small number. Jacques. But if you yourself say that intellectual work is a great pleasure and gives an advantage over those who are ignorant, it is clear that everyone will want to study, me first. And then who will do the manual work? Rock. All, because while studying letters and sciences, we must also do physical work. Everyone must work with their heads and arms. These two kinds of work, far from harming each other, support each other, because man, to be well, needs to exercise all his organs, the brain as well as the muscles. He who has developed intelligence and is accustomed to thinking succeeds better in manual work, and he who is in good health, as one is when one exercises his limbs in hygienic conditions, also has a more alert and penetrating mind. Moreover, since both kinds of work are necessary, since one of them is more pleasant than the other, and since, thanks to it, man acquires conscience and dignity, it is not right that a part of humanity is condemned to the brutalization of exclusively manual work, to leave only a few men the privilege of science and consequently of power. Therefore, I repeat, all must work both physically and intellectually. Jacques. That too I understand, but, among manual work, there will always be some that are hard and others that are easy, there will be some beautiful ones and some ugly ones. Who would want, for example, to become a miner or a scavenger? Rock. If you knew, my dear Jacques, what inventions and what studies we have made and are doing every day, you would understand that, even today, if the organization of work did not depend on those who do not work and who, consequently, are in no way concerned about the well-being of workers, even today all manual trades could be carried out in conditions such that there would no longer be anything repugnant, unhealthy, or too difficult about them, and consequently could be exercised by workers who choose them voluntarily. If this is possible now, then imagine what would happen, the day when, everyone having to work, the efforts and studies of all would be directed in such a way as to make the work less heavy and more pleasant. And if, after that, there were still professions which continued to be harder than others, we would seek to compensate for this inequality by means of certain advantages, not to mention that when we all work together in the interest of all, we see the birth of the spirit of fraternity and condescension which is characteristic of the family, so that, far from wanting to spare ourselves fatigue, everyone tries to do the most difficult things themselves. Jacques. You're right, but if all this doesn't happen, what will we do? Rock. Well, if, despite everything, there were still necessary jobs that no one would want to do out of free choice, then we would all do them, each a little, by working, for example, one day a month, a week, a year, or otherwise. But rest assured, if something is necessary for everyone, we will find a way to do it. Don't we today accept being a soldier to please others? Are we not going to fight against people who have done us no harm, and even against our friends and our brothers? It will be better, I believe, to be hard-working for our pleasure and for the good of all. Jacques. You know, you're starting to persuade me. However, there is still something that does not sit well in my head. It's a big deal to take away property from the gentleman. I don't know, but, isn't there any other way? Rock. And how do you want to do it? As long as it remains in the hands of the rich, they will be the ones to command and seek their interests without looking after ours. But why don't you want to take away the property from the gentleman? Do you by any chance believe that this would be an unjust thing, a bad action? Jacques. Not, after what you told me, it seems to me that it would be a holy thing, since, by tearing it from them, we will also tear away from them our flesh on which they gorge themselves. And then, if we take the fortune, it is not taking it for ourselves alone, it is to put it in common and do the good of all, right? Rock. No doubt, and even, if you examine the thing carefully, you will see that the gentlemen themselves will gain. Certainly they will have to stop commanding, being proud and being lazy, they will have to start working, but when the work is done with the help of machines, and with great concern for the well-being of the workers, it will be reduced to a useful and pleasant exercise. Don't the gentlemen go hunting now? Do they not occupy themselves with horse riding, gymnastics and other exercises which prove that muscular work is a necessity and a pleasure for all healthy and well-fed men? It is therefore for them to do for production this work that they do today for pure entertainment. Besides, how many benefits will they derive from the general well-being? Look, for example, in our country, the few gentlemen there are rich and play like little princes, but, during this time, the streets are ugly and dirty for them as for us, the corrupt air that comes out of our slums and neighboring swamps makes them sick like us, they cannot alone, with their particular fortunes, improve the country, something which could easily be done with the help of all. Our misery therefore affects them indirectly. And all this, without counting the continual fear in which they live of being assassinated or of seeing a violent revolution. So, you see clearly that we would only do good to the gentlemen by taking the fortune. It is true that they do not understand it and that they will never understand it that way, because they want to command and they imagine that the poor are made of different dough than they are. But what does it matter to us? If they do not want to come to an agreement out of goodwill, too bad for them, we will know how to force them to do so. Jacques. All this is right, but couldn't we try to do things little, by mutual agreement? We would leave the property to those who own it, on the condition that they raise wages and treat us like men. So, gradually, we could put something aside, buy a piece of land too, and then, when we were all owners, we would put everything in common as you say. I heard one who suggested something like this. Rock. Understand, to settle amicably, there is only one way, the owners voluntarily give up their properties. But you shouldn't think about that, you know. As long as individual property exists, that is to say that the land, instead of belonging to everyone, belongs to Peter or Paul, there will always be poverty and everything will go from bad to worse. With individual property, everyone seeks to draw water from their mill and the owners, not only, try to give the workers the least they can, but they also wage war among themselves. In general, everyone seeks to sell his products as much as he can and each buyer, for his part, seeks to pay as little as possible. So what happens? It is that the owners, the manufacturers, the large merchants, who have the means to manufacture and sell wholesale, to provide themselves with machines, to take advantage of all the favorable market conditions and to wait, for the sale, the favorable moment, and even selling at a loss for a while, end up ruining the small owners and traders, who fall into poverty and must, they and their sons, go to work on a daily basis. Thus, and this is something we see every day, bosses who work alone, or with few workers, are forced, after a painful struggle, to close shops and look for work in large factories. Small landowners, who cannot even pay taxes, must sell fields and houses to large landowners, and so on. So that if a good-hearted owner wanted to improve the conditions of his workers, he would only put himself in a position to no longer be able to compete, he would infallibly be ruined. On the other hand, the workers, driven by hunger, must compete with each other, and, as there are more hands available than are needed for the work to be done, not that the work actually lack, but because the bosses have an interest in not making people work more, they must take bread from each other's mouths, and, if you work for this or that sum, there will always be another worker who will do half price the same work. It is thanks to this situation that even progress becomes a misfortune. We invent a machine, immediately a large number of workers remain without work, no longer earning, they cannot consume, and thus, indirectly, they take work away from others. In America, immense areas are now being cultivated and a lot of grain is being produced. The owners there, without worrying, of course, whether people in America have enough to eat, send the wheat to Europe to earn more. Here, the price of wheat falls, but the poor, instead of being better off, find themselves worse off, because the owners, unable to cope with this good market, no longer cultivate the land or only work the small part where the soil is most productive. As a result, a large number of workers remain unemployed. Wheat costs little, it's true, but the poor people don't even earn the few pennies it takes to buy it. Jacques. Ah, now I understand. I had heard that people did not want to bring in wheat from outside, and it seemed to me a great naughtiness to reject this food in this way. I believed that the bourgeois wanted to starve the people. But now I see they had their reasons. Rock. No, because if the wheat doesn't arrive, it's bad from another point of view. The owners, then, no longer fearing external competition, sell at the prices they want, and... Jacques. So what to do? Rock. What to do? I've already told you, we have to put everything in common. So the more products there are, the better it will be. Jacques. But tell me a little, what if we made an arrangement with the owners? They would provide the land and capital, we the labor, and we would share the products. What do you say? Rock. First, I say that if you, your boss, want to share, he wouldn't want it. Force would have to be used to force him to do so. So why do things half-heartedly and settle for a system that allows injustice and parasitism to persist and prevents the increase in production? And then, what right do certain men, not working, have to come and take half of what the workers produce? Besides, I told you, not only would half of the products be given to the bosses, but also the total sum of these products would be less than what it could be, because, with private property and labor divided, we produce less than with joint work. It's the same as lifting a rock. 100 men can try it alone, but they won't succeed. 2 or 3 men acting at the same time will lift it effortlessly. If a man wants to make a pin, who knows if he will succeed in an hour, while 10 men together make thousands a day. And the further we go, the more we will have to work together to take advantage of the discoveries of science. In this regard, I want to respond to an objection that is often made to us. Economists, who are people paid by the rich to be told that they have the right to be rich at the expense of the work of others. Economists and all scientists with full bellies often say that poverty does not depend not from the monopolization of property by the upper classes, but from the lack of natural products. According to them, these products would be completely insufficient if they were distributed to everyone. They obviously say this in order to be able to conclude that poverty is a fatal thing, against which there is nothing to be done. This is how the priest acts who keeps you docile and submissive by telling you that this is the will of God. But you shouldn't believe a word of all this. The products of the land and of industry, even with the current organization, are sufficient for everyone to live comfortably, and if they are not even more abundant, The fault lies with the bosses who do not think only to gain as much as possible and who will even go so far as to let certain products lose to prevent prices from falling. And, in fact, while they claim that there is not enough natural wealth, they leave large areas of land uncultivated, and a large number of workers without work. But to this, they answer you that, even if all the lands were cultivated and exploited by all men in the most intelligent way, the production of the land being limited while the increase in the population is not, there would always come a time when the production of food substances would remain stationary, while the population would increase indefinitely, and the scarcity with it. This is why, they say, the only remedy for social ills is for the poor to not have children at all, or at least to have only a very small number of them. I haven't studied much and I don't know if their principle is true, but what I do know is that their remedy doesn't cure anything. We see this clearly in countries where land is abundant and the population is small. There is as much and even more poverty than in countries where the population is dense. We must therefore change the social organization, put all the land under cultivation. Later, if the population tends to increase too much, it would be time to think about limiting the number of children. But let's return to the question of sharing the product between the owner and the worker. This system once existed for field work in some parts of France, as it still exists in Tuscany, but it gradually disappeared, because the owners had more advantage in having them work on a daily basis. Today, with machines, with scientific agriculture, with products that come from outside, it has become a necessity for owners to adopt the large-scale cultivation carried out by hired workers. Those who do not will be ruined by competition. To conclude in a few words, I will tell you that if the current system continues, these will be the results. Property will be concentrated more and more in the hands of a few, and the worker will be reduced to poverty by machines and rapid production methods. Thus we will have a few great lords, masters of the world, a small number of workers attached to the service of the machines, then valets and gendarmes to serve and defend the lords. The mass of the people will either die of hunger or live on alms. We are already beginning to see it. Small property is disappearing, the number of unemployed workers is increasing, and the gentlemen, either out of fear or out of pity for all these people who are dying of hunger, are organizing economical kitchens. If the people do not want to be reduced to begging their bread at the doors of the rich and in town halls, as in the past at the doors of convents, there is only one way: seize the land and the machines and work for one's own account. Jacques. But what if governments made good laws to force the rich not to make poor people suffer? Rock. We always come back to the same point. The government is made up of gentlemen, and there is no reason to suppose that these people want to make laws against themselves. And even if the poor could manage to command in their turn, would that be a reason to give the rich the means to put their foot down on us again? Believe me, where there are rich and poor, the latter can raise their voices for a moment, in times of riot, but the rich always end up in command. This is why if we succeed in being stronger for a moment, we will have to immediately take away property from the rich so that they no longer have in their hands the means to put things back to the way they were before. Jacques. I understand, we must create a good republic, make all men equal, and then he who works will eat, he who does nothing will rub his stomach. Ah! I regret being old, and you are happy, you young people, who will see a good time. Rock. Hey, gently, friend. You, by the word republic, mean social revolution, and, for those who can understand you, you are right. But you express yourself badly, in short, because the republic is not at all what you mean. Get into the idea that a republican government is a government like any other, only, instead of a king, there is a president and ministers, who in reality have the same powers. We see it clearly here in France, and even if we had the democratic republic that the radicals promise us, how would we be further forward? Instead of two chambers, we would only have one, that of deputies, but would we still continue to be soldiers, to work like slaves despite the fantastic promises of the deputies? You see, as long as there are rich and poor, the rich will be in charge. Whether we are in a republic or a monarchy, the facts which result from individual property will always exist. As competition regulates economic relations, property will be concentrated in a few hands, machines will take away work from workers and the masses will be reduced to starving or living on alms. Moreover, there are republics at present, not counting ours, which must have given rise to wonders. Well, have they brought an improvement to the condition of the proletarians? Jacques. What do you mean? And I thought that republic meant equality. Rock. Yes, it is the Republicans who say it, and they hold the following reasoning: in a republic, they say, the deputies, who make laws, are elected by all the people, therefore, when the people are not happy, they send better deputies and everything works out. However, as it is the poor who are the vast majority, it is they in reality who will be in charge. That's what they say, but the reality is very different. The poor, who, by the very fact that they are poor, are at the same time ignorant and superstitious, will remain such, as the priests and bosses want, as long as they do not enjoy economic independence and will not be fully aware of their interests. You and I, who have had the good fortune to earn a little more and to be able to educate ourselves a little, we will be able to have the intelligence to understand our interests and the strength to face the revenge of the bosses, but the great mass will not be able to do so as long as current conditions persist. In front of the ballot box, it is not like in times of revolution, where one courageous man is worth 100 timid ones and draws after him many men who would never have had, on their own, the energy to stand up. Revolt. In front of the urn, what counts is the number, and as long as there are priests and patrons, the number will always be for the priests who threaten hell and for the patrons who give or take away bread from whoever they want. But what? Don't you know that, by chance? Today, for example, the majority of voters are poor. However, do you see them choosing poor people like them to represent them and defend their interests? Jacques. As for that, no, they always ask the boss for whom they should vote and do as he orders them. If they don't do it, the boss chases them away. Rock. So, you see, there is nothing to hope for from universal suffrage. The people will always send bourgeois to parliament, and the bourgeois will manage to keep the people always ignorant and enslaved as before. And besides, if workers were sent there, they, with the best will in the world, would be unable to do anything in this corrupt environment. This is why there is only one way to achieve a good result: expropriate the rich and give everything to the people. In the next revolution, the people must not allow themselves to be deceived as they have been so many times by the Republicans. Until now he was made to believe that the Republican form was the best social form that could exist, and it was by promising him mountains and wonders that they made him drop his gun on the days of the revolution. Another time, we must not allow ourselves to be lured by empty words, and we must resolutely seize the property. Jacques. You are right. We have been deceived so many times that we need to open our eyes. But however, there will always be a need for a government, because if there is no one to rule, how will things work? Rock. And what needs to be commanded? Why don't we do our own business? He who commands always seeks his advantage, and, either through ignorance or malice, he betrays the people. Power brings surges of pride to the heads of even the best. Moreover, and this is the main reason for not wanting any leader, men must stop being led like a herd and get used to thinking and knowing their dignity and their strength. To educate the people, accustom them to freedom and the management of their affairs, we must let them act for themselves, make them feel responsible for their actions. He may often make mistakes and do wrong, but he himself will see the consequences, he will understand that he has done wrong and will change his path. Not to mention that the harm that the people left to themselves can do does not represent 1,000th part of that done by the best government. For a child to learn to walk, he must be allowed to walk himself and not be frightened by the few falls he may make. Jacques. Yes, but for the child to be able to walk, he must already have a certain strength in his legs, otherwise he will have to remain in his mother's arms. Rock. That's true, but governments are nothing like a mother, and they are not the ones who improve and strengthen the people. In reality, social progress almost always occurs against or in spite of the government. The latter, at most, passes into law what has become the need and the will of the masses, and even then he spoils it with his spirit of domination and monopoly. There are more or less advanced peoples, however, in any state of civilization or even barbarism, the people would do their business better than with a government from their own. You suppose, as I see, that the government is composed of the most intelligent and the most capable, but this is not the case, because, in general, governments are composed, directly or by delegation, of those who have the most money. Besides, the exercise of power spoils the best minds. Put hitherto excellent men in government. What will happen? No longer understanding the needs of the people, forced to take care of the interests created by politics, corrupted by the lack of emulation and control, distracted from the branch of activity in which they had real competence and obliged to make laws on things that they had never heard of until then, they will end up believing themselves to be of a superior nature, by constituting themselves into a caste, and they will only deal with the people to frustrate them and keep them in check. It would be much better if we did our own business by agreeing with the workers of other trades and other countries, not only in France and Europe, but throughout the world, because men are all brothers, and have an interest in helping each other. Doesn't it seem to you? Jacques. You're right. But what will we do with the bad guys, the thieves, the bandits? Rock. First of all, when there is no more poverty and ignorance, all these people will not exist. But assuming there are still some left, would that be a reason to have a government and a police force? Can't we bring them to reason ourselves? Only, of course, we will not mistreat them as we do today to the innocent as well as the guilty, but we will put them in a position to do no harm, and we will do everything to put them back on the right path. Jacques. So, when we have socialism, everyone will be happy and content, and there will be no more misery, no hatred, no jealousy, no prostitution, no wars, no injustice. Rock. I do not know to what degree of happiness humanity can reach, but I am convinced that everything will be as good as possible. Moreover, we will seek to improve things more and more, and progress will not be like today for the benefit of a few, but for the benefit of all. Jacques. But when will that happen? I am old, and now that I know that the world will not always be like this, I would hate to die without having seen at least one day of justice. Rock. When will this happen? I do not know. It depends on us. The more we work to open people's eyes, the sooner it will happen. However, this must be said. Before this century, those who are today gentlemen, bourgeois, as we call them, were subject in 1,000 ways to nobles and priests. In 1789 the Great Revolution broke out in France, which, after many vicissitudes, ended up freeing the bourgeoisie and giving them, along with freedom, power. In a few years, in 1889, the century in which the bourgeois revolution took place will end, and there are many people who say that this year will see the revolution of the poor accomplished, a revolution which will not take place for the benefit of a single class, like that of the last century, but for the entire human race. 1. When many people believe something like this, it eventually comes true, therefore the year 1889 could well be that of our deliverance. However, be careful that there is nothing fatal before this date. The revolution could take place before or after. I repeat, it depends on us. If we work to make the revolution, it will take place in 1889 and even before. If, on the contrary, we fall asleep, if we wait for the larks to fall all roasted from the sky, it could be centuries before it takes place. Jacques. I understand, but since we are together, I would like to ask you for a few more explanations before leaving us. I often hear about communists, socialists, internationalists, collectivists, anarchists. What do all these names mean? Rock. Ah, you are right to ask me that, because there is nothing like agreeing on the value of words. So, you must know that socialists are those who believe that poverty is the primary cause of all social ills, and that, as long as we do not destroy poverty, we will not be able to eradicate either ignorance or slavery. Neither political inequality, nor prostitution, nor any of the evils which keep the people in a horrible situation, and which yet are nothing compared to the sufferings coming directly from poverty itself. Socialists believe that poverty depends on the fact that the land and all the raw materials, the machines, and all the instruments of work belong to a small number of individuals who thus control the life of the entire working class and find themselves in struggle continual and in competition, not only with the proletarians, that is to say those who have nothing, but also with each other, for the possession of property. Socialists believe that by abolishing individual property, that is to say the cause, we will at the same time abolish the poverty which is the effect. And this property can and must be abolished, because the organization and distribution of wealth must be done according to the current interest of men, without regard for the rights, supposedly acquired, that the bourgeoisie now arrogate to themselves because that their ancestors were stronger, or happier, or more scoundrels than the others. So, you see, the name socialists designates those who want social wealth to serve all men and for there to be neither owners nor proletarians, neither rich nor poor, neither bosses nor employees. A few years ago, we understood it this way, and it was enough to call ourselves socialists to be hated and pursued by the bourgeois who would have preferred 100 times to see a million assassins than a single socialist. But when the bourgeoisie saw that, despite all their persecutions and slanders, socialism was making its way, that the people were beginning to open their eyes, then they thought that it was necessary to try to confuse the question in order to be able to deceive people better, and many of them began to say that they too were socialists, because they wanted the good of the people and thought of destroying or reducing poverty. In the past, therefore, they said that the social question, that is to say the question of poverty, did not exist. Today, on the contrary, that socialism scares them. They affirm that any man who studies the so-called social question is also a socialist, as if one could call a doctor someone who studies an illness with the intention, not of to heal, but to make it last. This is how today you find people who call themselves socialists, among the Republicans, among the Royalists, among the clerics, among the magistrates, everywhere in fact, but their socialism consists of being appointed deputies, by dint of promises they would be unable to keep. So, you see, when a man tells you he is a socialist, ask him if he wants to abolish individual property and put property in common. If so, embrace him like a brother; if not, distrust him, he is an enemy. Jacques. So you are a socialist, I understand that. But what do the words communist and collectivist mean? Rock. Communists and collectivists are both socialists, but they have different ideas about what should be done after property has been pooled. Collectivists say that each worker, or better each association of workers, has the right to the raw materials and the instruments of work, and that each is master of the product of his work. As long as he lives, he does what he wants; when he dies, what he has put aside returns to the association. His children also have the means to work and enjoy the fruits of their labor, but letting them inherit would be a first step towards inequality and privilege. With regard to education, the education of children, the maintenance of the elderly and the infirm and all public services, each association of workers would give everything necessary to make up for what the members of the group might lack. The community. The communists say this, since, for everything to go well, men must love each other and consider themselves members of the same family, since the property must be shared, since work, to be productive and accomplished by means of machines, must be done by large meetings of workers, since, to take advantage of all the varieties of soil and atmospheric conditions and to ensure that each region produces what suits it best, and since, to avoid, on the other hand, competition and hatred between the various countries, it is necessary to establish perfect solidarity between men throughout the world. Let's do one thing, instead of risking confusing what you did with what I did, Let's all work and put everything in common, so everyone will give to society everything that their strength will allow them to give until there are enough products for everyone, and everyone will take everything they need, limiting their needs only to those things that they do not yet have in abundance. Jacques. Not so fast, first explain to me what the word solidarity means. Indeed, you told me that there must be solidarity between men, and, to tell the truth, I did not understand you well. Rock. Here it is, in your family, for example, whatever you earn, you and your brothers, your wife, and your sons, you put in common, then you make the soup and you all eat together, and if there isn't enough, you all squeeze your stomach a little. Now, if one of you is more fortunate, if he finds that he can earn a little more, it is a good thing for all. If, on the contrary, one remains without work or falls ill, it is a misfortune for all, because certainly, among you, the one who does not work nevertheless eats at the common table, and the one who falls ill is also the cause of greater expenses. This is how, in your family, instead of trying to take away work and bread from each other, you seek to help each other, because the good of one is the good of all. As the evil of one is also the evil of all. Thus hatred and envy move away, thus develops this reciprocal affection which never exists, on the contrary, in a family whose interests are divided. This is what we call solidarity. It is therefore necessary to establish between men the same relationship as those which exist between the members of a well-united family. Jacques. Got it? But back to the question from earlier. Tell me, are you a collectivist or a communist? Rock. As for me, I am a communist because it seems to me that if we are to be friends, we must not be half friends. Collectivism still leaves seeds of rivalry and hatred. But I go further. Even if everyone could live with what they themselves produced, collectivism would still be inferior to communism, because it would keep men isolated and thus diminish their strength and their sympathy. Besides, just as the shoemaker cannot eat his shoes nor the blacksmith eat iron, as the farmer cannot cultivate the land either without the workers who prepare the iron, make the instruments, and so on, it would therefore be necessary to organize an exchange between the various producers, taking into account each of this that he has done. Then, it would necessarily happen that the shoemaker, for example, would seek to give greater value to his shoes and would like to have as much money as possible in exchange. For his part, the peasant would like to give him as little as possible. How the hell to deal with that? Collectivism, in short, seems to me to give rise to a number of problems that are very difficult to resolve, and, with this system, things would easily get confused. Communism, on the contrary, does not give rise to any difficulty. Everyone works and everyone enjoys the work of everyone. It is only a matter of seeing what things are needed, so that all are satisfied, and of ensuring that all these things are produced in abundance. Jacques. So, with communism, there would no longer be a need for money. Rock. Neither money, nor anything else that takes its place, nothing but a register of necessary objects and products to seek to always keep production up to needs. The only serious difficulty would be that many men did not want to work, but I have already told you the reasons why work, which today is such a heavy penalty, will become a pleasure and at the same time a moral obligation to which very few individuals could want to evade. Moreover, if, due to the bad education we have received, there are men at the start of the new society who refuse to work, we will be left leaving them outside the community, giving them raw material and tools. So if they want to eat, they will get to work. But you will see that these cases will not happen. Moreover, what we want to achieve at the moment is the pooling of soil, raw materials, work tools, houses, and all existing wealth. As for the mode of organization, the people will do what they want. It is only through practice that we will be able to see which is the best system. Thus, we can predict that in many places communism will be established, elsewhere collectivism. When we have seen both put to the test, we will certainly accept the best of both systems everywhere. Jacques. I understand that too. But tell me, what is anarchy? Rock. Anarchy means without government. I have already told you that the government only serves to defend the bourgeoisie, and when it comes to our interests, the best thing is to take care of them ourselves. Instead of appointing deputies and municipal councillors who will make and undo laws that must be obeyed, we will handle our affairs ourselves, and when, to carry out our deliberations, it is necessary to put someone in charge, we will let's say to do this or that way and not otherwise. If it is something that cannot be done the first time, we will charge those who are capable of seeing, studying, and making proposals, but, in any case, nothing will be done without our will. And so our delegates, instead of being individuals to whom we have given the right to command us, to impose laws on us, will be people chosen from among the most capable, who will have no authority, but only the duty to execute what the people have ordered. In short, we would entrust some with organizing schools, for example, with cleaning the streets and ensuring the exchange of products, just as we entrust a shoemaker today with making a pair of shoes. This, in short, is what anarchy is. Jacques. But give me a few more explanations. Tell me how I can occupy myself, I who am a poor ignoramus, with all the things that ministers and deputies do. Rock. And what good are they doing, these ministers and these deputies, that you have to lament not knowing what to do? They make laws and organize the public force to keep the people under the yoke in the interest of the owners. That is all. We have no need of this science. It is true that ministers and deputies deal with things which, in themselves, are good and necessary, but it is only to make them turn to the benefit of a certain class and to stop their progress through useless regulations and vexatious. For example, these gentlemen take care of the railways, but what do we need from them in this? Are there not enough engineers, mechanics, workers of all categories, and will the locomotives no longer work when the ministers, deputies, shareholders, and other parasites have disappeared? It is the same for the post office, telegraphs, navigation, public education, hospitals, all things which are done by workers of different categories and in which the government only intervenes to do badly. Politics, in fact, as people in government understand it, is a difficult art for us, because in reality, it has nothing to do with the real interests of the populations. If, on the contrary, its aim was to satisfy the real needs of the people, then it would be a more difficult thing for a deputy than for us. Indeed, what do you want deputies who live in Paris to know, affecting the needs of all the communes of France? How do you expect these people who, in general, have wasted their time studying Greek or Latin, which they do not know, to know the interests of the different professions? Things would be different if everyone took care of the things they know and the needs they see for themselves. The revolution, once made, will have to proceed from the bottom up, so to speak. The people are divided into communes, and, in each commune, there are various trades which, immediately, through the effect of enthusiasm and under the impetus of our propaganda, will form associations. However, who understands the interests of your community and your profession better than you? When, subsequently, it is a question of bringing together several municipalities and several trade bodies, the respective delegates will bring the wishes of their constituents to the special assemblies and will seek to reconcile the various needs and desires. Deliberations will always be subject to the control and approval of the constituents, so that the interests of the people will not be neglected. And thus, step by step, we will proceed to the conciliation of humankind. Jacques. But if, in a country or in an association, there are some who have an opinion different from that of others, what will we do? It's the few who have the most who will have the upper hand, isn't it? Rock. In law, no, because, with regard to truth and justice, numbers should count for nothing and only one can be right against 100, against 100,000, against all. In practice, we do what we can. If unanimity is not obtained, those who agree and who constitute the majority act in accordance with their idea, within the limits of their group, and if experience proves them right, there is no doubt that they are imitated. Otherwise, the proof is made in favor of the minority and we act accordingly. This will maintain the inviolability of the principles of equality and justice on which society must be based. Please note, however, that the issues on which we cannot agree will be few in number and not very important, because there will no longer be the divisions of interests that exist today, because everyone will be able to choose the country and the association, that is to say the companions with whom he will want to live, and, above all, because it will only be a question of making a decision on clear things, which everyone can understand and relating rather to the domain of practice, of positive science, than to that of theories where opinions vary endlessly. When we have found, thanks to experience, the best solution to this or that given problem, it will be a question of persuading people by practically demonstrating the thing to them, and not of crushing them under the weight of a majority of votes. Wouldn't it make you laugh today if we called on city dwellers to vote on the time at which we should sow crops, when this is something already established by experience? And if this thing was not yet perfectly fixed, would you resort to voting and not experience to make it? This is how all public or private affairs will be handled. Convince yourself that, outside of solidarity, there is only war and tyranny, and be sure, on the other hand, that, war and tyranny being things which harm everyone, men will hardly be masters of their destinies, that they will turn to solidarity in order to achieve our ideal of peace, prosperity, and universal freedom. Jacques. Perfectly so. You are a socialist, and among socialists, you are especially a communist and anarchist. Why are you also called an internationalist? Rock. Because I was part of the International Workers' Association. This association, called by abbreviation the International, was made up of people from all countries who followed the principles of which I sought today to give you an idea. Those who entered this association undertook to propagate by all possible means the principles of anarchic communism, to combat any hope of voluntary concessions on the part of the bosses and the government or of gradual and peaceful reforms, to awaken in the people the awareness of their rights and the spirit of revolt, so that they can proceed, as soon as they have the strength, to the destruction of political power, that is to say of the government, and to conquer the land and all existing wealth. Jacques. Therefore, all those who embrace anarchic communist principles belong to the International? Rock. Not necessarily, because one can be convinced of the truth of a principle and yet remain at home, without worrying about propagating what one believes to be right. However, to act in this way, one must have a very weak conviction and a very poorly tempered soul, because, when one sees the terrible evils which afflict one's fellow men and one knows the remedy, how can one, if we have a little heart, stay inactive? He who does not know the truth is not guilty, but he who, knowing it, acts as if he did not know it, is greatly guilty. Then, for different reasons, persecutions, divisions, this association dissolved, but the ideas remain the same, and scattered individuals or groups continue to propagate the same principles. Jacques. That is good, and I too, when I have thought a little about everything you have told me, I want to start spreading these great truths. If the bourgeois treat me as a bandit and a criminal, I will tell them to come and work and suffer like me. Only then will they have the right to speak. 1. The first edition of this brochure dates from 1885. Errico Malatesta.